Hi, in this tutorial I will give an overview of LabVIEW SQL Toolkit. So basically LabVIEW SQL Toolkit is an SQL toolkit made by me where you can communicate with SQL databases from LabVIEW. You can download the LabVIEW SQL Toolkit for free from my blog. So just go to my blog and then you will find the location for downloading this LabVIEW SQL Toolkit. I will show it later in this tutorial. First, here you see the web page where you can download the LabVIEW SQL Toolkit. So just follow this link and then you will find the file that you can download, and when you have download and install this LabVIEW SQL Toolkit, it will appear in LabVIEW as a separate tool palette where you have four different functions that you can use. You use SQL Open in order to open the connection to an SQL database. Then you use either Select in order to retrieve data from the database, or Execute in order to insert or update data inside the database. And then finally you will use SQL Close in order to close the connection to the database. So basically make sure that you have LabVIEW installed on your computer, and then go to your web browser, go to location on my blog, halvorsen.blog. Then this is the front page. Just here in the menu, select Programming, LabVIEW, and then in the bottom of this page you find something called Database Communication in LabVIEW. Just click on this one, and then here you get an overview of this LabVIEW SQL Toolkit. Here you see a basic example where this toolkit has been used. So here you open the connection to the database. Here, typically inside a while loop, you use the SQL Execute or the other function that are retrieving data from the database. So here you just enter the query, in this case insert into the name of the table, the column names and the values like this, and then basically you are inserting the data into your database that you specify here and open here, and then outside the while loop, when you click on the stop button or something, you close the connection to the database. And if you browse down here, you find this LabVIEW SQL Toolkit, and then just click on this link, download LabVIEW SQL Toolkit for LabVIEW. So just click on it, and then here in your File Explorer and the downloads, this package has been downloaded. So then you basically just unzip it by clicking Extract All, and then inside here you find three different files. Start by open the README file, and here it says where you are going to install these different files. So there are two files, one SQL toolkit.mnu. So this file should be copied to the LabVIEW location under the subfolder menus and subfolder categories. So inside this categories folder you should copy the file SQL toolkit.mnu, and in your LabVIEW location we have a existing folder called vi.lib. In that folder you should copy this other file called SQL toolkit.llb. So let's see how we can do that. So then I just open my file browser, find the location where I have installed LabVIEW. Typically you install LabVIEW on your C drive under program files. I have installed a 32-bit version of LabVIEW, so then this LabVIEW has been installed in this folder. If you have a 64-bit, typically LabVIEW is installed in this folder. But I have a 32-bit version of LabVIEW, so then I select this folder. Then I just find the folder called National Instruments, and here on my computer I have different versions of LabVIEW. My newest version is LabVIEW 2024, so I select this one, and then here I will find this menus folder, which is here, and here the categories folder, and basically I'm going to copy this SQL Toolkit.mnu file inside this location. So that's the first file, and then the second file should be copied to this vi-lib folder, which is here on the LabVIEW folder, vi.lib here. So here I just copy this file into that specific location here. So now I've copied the necessary file. Next, now I can just close down here and open my LabVIEW programming environment. Wait a few seconds until LabVIEW is opening. And here, this is the startup menu, startup window in LabVIEW. I just select File, New VI, and then go to the block diagram, and then I can just right click here to pop up this function palette, and then you see in the bottom here there is a new palette called SQL, which are actually this LabVIEW SQL Toolkit. So then I can just pin it, and then here we have these 4 functions. You use the SQL open in order to open the connection to the database, and you use the SQL close in order to close the connection. Those are typically placed outside a while loop or a for loop or whatever, and inside the while loop or for loop you use either SQL select in order to retrieve data from the database, or SQL execute in order to insert or update data inside the database. The next step now is to make sure that you have an SQL database installed on your computer or on the network or in the cloud. So I am using SQL Server from Microsoft, which I have installed on my local computer. So then I just open the SQL Server Management Studio, which I'm using to communicate with my SQL Server, and here I can create databases, I can create tables, etc. So let's just create a very basic new database and a simple table, which we will use in order to retrieve and insert data from LabVIEW. So then here I have just an SQL Express version of SQL Server from Microsoft. I just enter my password. For the default SI user, of course, you can have either use Windows authentication or you can use SQL Server authentication. But I just use the built-in SI login and the password I have entered during the installation of the SQL Server. So I just click connect. Yeah, I just need to spell the password correct, like this, and then I get access to my local SQL Server database, and I have already lots of databases here. Let's create a new database from scratch. So assume we want to enter some books or something into our database, then I just right click here under databases, new database, and I just create a new database called library or something. Click OK, and then you see the library database has been created here. So far it has no tables, so then I just right click on the tables and create and select new table in order to create a new table. So then let's just create some basic columns. Assume you have a book ID, which is data type integer, and we have a book title. It could be a varchar 50 or something, and then we could have an author of the book. It could also be a varchar 50, like this. So now we have created a simple table with 3 columns: book ID, book title, and author. Then I just click on the save button here, and I can name the table whatever I like, but I just call it book. I click OK, and then here on the tables, this book table has been created. So far it's empty, so then I can just right click here on the book table, edit top 200 rows, and then I just enter some dummy data. Book ID, I just set it to 1. Book title, programming in LabVIEW could be a nice title, author could be me. Like this, another book called Python. It could be written by Elvis Presley or something. So now we have 2 books in the system. Let's create another one. 3. C# programming could be a nice title, and it could be made by John Wayne or something. So now we have 3 different books in our database. I can also click here, new query, and then I just make a simple query like this: select all from book, and then just click execute, and then you see we get this result. We get all columns from the book table, book ID, book title, and author, and we have 3 different books inside this table. So let's go to LabVIEW and see if we are able to get the same result inside our LabVIEW programming environment. So then we are back in the LabVIEW programming environment, here in my block diagram, and here I have the SQL palette with the different functions. So let's just use this SQL open. I need to use this SQL select. I need to use this SQL close. And then if I click Ctrl H, you will get a small help window when I click on top of the different different functions. So then the input to this one is a connection string, which you need in order to connect to the database, and then you will have a valid connection out, which should be going to the input on the SQL select function like this, and then the output of this should go to the SQL close like this. Now we have the main structure ready. Now we need to find the connection string, or we can use an ODBC connection. So then let's open the in Windows the ODBC data sources window. Now I just click add here, select my database driver, which is Microsoft SQL Server. So here I found SQL Server. I select this one, click finish, and I just specify a name. Call it library or something. So this is just a name. You can call it whatever you like, but you need to remember the name and use that name in the SQL open function in LabVIEW. You need to select your SQL Server database. So if it doesn't pop up here in the list, you can of course also enter it manually, but my database is this one. You can also find the name in your SQL Server Management Studio here. So this is the name of your database, and then you can just click properties, and then just copy this one and just paste it in here like this. Then you click next. Here you select different options. Here you have Windows Authentication. Of course you can use that, or you can use SQL Server Authentication. I choose to use this one, and then I just use this default login called SA, short for System Administrator, and enter my password like this, which is the same password I was using in order to connect to this SQL Server Management Studio. Click next. Here I need to change my select my database, which is library, and then I just remove all the other selections here, click next, just do nothing here, click finish, and then I can click test data source, and hopefully the test completed successfully. Then I can just click OK, and then you see this name has been stored here in the list. So I just click OK, go back to my LabVIEW, and this SQL open, which has this input called connection string. So I just right click on it, create a constant, and then here I can either enter a connection string where you have the provider SQL OLE database, data source, the name of your server, and user identifier could be your username and password. So here you could use the default SA login and the password and the name of the database, or you can just use this ODBC connection string, which was a library, like this. So now this should be good. Next, I need to here in this function SQL select, I need to specify my SQL query. So then I do the same on the input SQL query. I just right click, create constant, and then you just have a blank string constant here, but then I have already made a query here in my SQL Server Management Studio, select all from book, which I'm just copying and pasting inside here, like this. And then the output of this one is a two-dimensional array called data. So basically I can just right click on it, create an indicator, like this, and then you see on my front panel this indicator has been created, which is just a two-dimensional array. I just make it bigger so you see it like this, and basically now I could just run my application. Something wrong here, let's figure out what the problem is. This is a basic spelling mistake here in the ODBC data source name. So library, make sure to spell it correct, like this. And now I can just click the run button, and then you see the data from the database are now popping up here in my LabVIEW front panel. So these are the same three books that are stored in the database. So basically this is how you use this LabVIEW SQL Toolkit in LabVIEW in order to retrieve data from your SQL database, in this case an SQL Server database from Microsoft. Instead of this default two-dimensional table, I can also of course use another graphical user interface component. So let's just delete this one and this one, and then let's choose, let's say this, you can either use this list box or this multi-column list box, since it's two-dimensional data. So I just select this one, put it on my front panel, like this, and then in order to get data into this multi-column list box, which I have here, I need to use a property node. So then I just right click, create, select property node, and then here you have lots of properties, but for this one you select item names, and then just right click on it and change all to right, and then the output of this SQL select are put into this multi-column list box property node called item names. So then let's just run it, and then you see the data also pops up here. Then I can just make my user interface a little bit neater. I can specify a header here. This is book ID, this is the title, and this is the author, like this. and you can also change the column size like this by just dragging, make it something like this, and then suddenly you have a nice user interface where you present data from the database like this. Next, let's see how we can insert data into the same table using this, not SQL select, but using this SQL execute. Then let's start by going back to our SQL Server Management Studio. I click New Query. So then I have this select query here. And here I can add new books. And here let's make a simple query where we insert a new book. So then I just use the insert statement, insert into name of the table is book. The column names, which is book ID, book title, and finally author like this. And then we use values, and then we can enter some new data. Now we have 3 books, and book ID is 1, 2, 3. Then I just specify 4. A new book title, LabVIEW SQL or something, and then since this is a text, I need to have it like this. And then the author could be Michael Jackson or something. So then we have our insert statement ready, insert into book, and then we specify the column, book ID, book title, and author values, and then a new book with a book ID 4, title is LabVIEW SQL, and the author is Michael Jackson. And then I can just type insert here, and then you see 1 row affected, and then I can go back to my query, select all from book, and then you see this book number 4 has been created. It's called LabVIEW SQL from the author Michael Jackson. Then I can just also here update this one. So basically now we have 4 books in our database, but just let's delete this last one. I just right click delete, and now we are back to 3 books. I can also run this query, select all from book, we have 3 books. Now let's go to LabVIEW and create this book number 4. And then we are going to use this insert statement inside our LabVIEW program. So then I just create a new program, new VI. I use this, start with using this SQL open. Now I'm going to use this SQL execute, and finally this SQL close. And then this input connection string or ODBC connection, just right click, create, constant, and then we just type this library like this, and then we just wire this connection out to connection in, connection out, and connection in like this. And now here under this SQL execute, it has an input called SQL query, so then I just right click, create, constant, and then we have a blank string. Go back to my SQL Server Management Studio and just copy this one, put it inside here like this. In this case you don't need any front panel, so I just run the code like this, and then I go to my other application where I have this list of books. I click run once more, and then you see this book number 4 has been created with the title LabVIEW SQL and Michael Jackson. So basically this is how you use this LabVIEW SQL Toolkit to retrieve data from the database or insert data into the database. Of course, here you can use other queries. Here you can use delete, update, etc. in order to either delete data from the database or update existing data from the database. Finally, I will show how you can use the connection string directly instead of this ODBC connection. So I just remove this one, and then on the input here, which is connection string, I just right click, create, and click constant, and then this is the format of the connection string. So then I only need to specify the data source, the username and the password and the name of the database. So then our data source, in our case, if I just go back to the SQL Server Management Studio, then this is the name of my database. So I just right click, properties, and then just copy this one and go back to LabVIEW. So the data source is entered here, and then the login in my case is this SA password, SA user, and the database was library, and then like this, and finally you need to enter the password for your user. Either you use the SI password or other users. But typically you don't want to enter your password here, so where everybody can see it. So then a good practice is to just either on your front panel or here in the block diagram, just create a string, and then you can use right click here and then select password display, and then you can enter your password to your database, and then you see it will contain of these asterisk symbols. So this means that you don't see your password in clear text, and then you can just use a label like this, password, and then in addition I just remove this one, and then you can use one of the built-in functions here under this string palette. You can use this format into string function, and then it has an input initial string, which is this one, and then instead of these 3 x's you just type %s, and then on the input here you just wire this password like this, and then the output string here that you wire to the connection string will now contain the entire connection string with your valid password like this. But nobody else than you will see the password, because if you use this right click on the text string and select password display, it will contain only asterisks like this. Basically this is our new program where we have instead of the ODBC connection used the SQL connection string here directly, where we specify our database name, our login user, our password, which is specified here, and the name of the database. And then let's just go to our front panel. So then I just right click, start by selecting delete all rows. So now you see it's empty, and when we run the program, well, there's something wrong here. Let's figure out what the problem is. Yeah, the problem here, if you see in this format into string, you have this initial string which I was using, but of course you are going to use this format string. So let's just delete this one, and then this one should be using format string instead, like this. So let's now run it. So basically there are one more thing we need to remember. So here under data source, this is the name of my computer, and this SQL Express is the name of the database instance installed on my computer, and I can have multiple instances of SQL Server on my computer, and then you use this slash symbol in order to separate the name of the computer and the name of the specific database. But you need to use 2 slashes like this in order to make it work. So now I have specify a connection string here, and I have the password here. I use this SQL open, and then here in the under SQL select I specify my query, select all from book, which I'm going to put into this multi-column list box. So then just run it, and then you see the data from the database pops up here in the multi-column list box here in my LabVIEW application. So now I have shown how you can communicate with an SQL Server database from your LabVIEW programming environment by using this LabVIEW SQL Toolkit. And then it's very simple to use. You have 4 different functions. One for open the connection to the database, which is here, and then you can either use the connection string directly, or you can set up an ODBC connection, and then you use either SQL select or SQL execute. You use SQL execute here in order to insert data, delete data, or update data that already exists in the database. If you want to retrieve data from the database, you use SQL select, and finally you just use this SQL close. If you are going to insert multiple data inside a loop, typically you put this SQL open outside the loop on the left side, and then you have either SQL select or SQL execute inside the while loop, and finally you have the SQL close outside the while loop on the right side. So that's all for now. So good luck with your LabVIEW programming and communicating with your SQL database using the LabVIEW programming environment and this LabVIEW SQL Toolkit. Thank you and goodbye.